I want to ask a question. Is anybody, most of us familiar with the expression need to know? See, anybody familiar with that expression, need to know? Okay. You know, in government and in business, in the military, information is often separated into categories of what people need to know versus what they would like to know or what would be nice to know. Now, we see this every day in our computerized working world, don't we? Information technology administrators in virtually every company, more than probably 20 or 25 people has somebody who has that job. They're able to set up computer systems and information such that, managers and employees are able to access company information based on their need to know. Now, the federal government uses this principle widely. Anyone who's ever worked in the federal government knows about the different security classifications which govern access to information based on a person's level of a job. If you have a low-level job, you don't have much access to confidential information. The higher the level you get, you have more information. At the bottom of the hierarchy is what's called your basic security clearance. Now, when I lived in Huntsville until recently and worked for a time on developing federal proposals, I had to obtain a basic security clearance just for a few years. Now, it wasn't really hard to do. They ask you some questions, you fill out a questionnaire, and they do a background check on your, they may talk to some of your neighbors and stuff like that. But you have to have one to work in an environment where classified information is stored or available. Now, I never had access to classified information, but I think there were times when I worked in places where some people did, A basic security clearance means basically that the federal government considers you just to be a law-abiding citizen with at least decent moral character, and you can be trusted not to divulge sensitive information. Now, at the other end of the hierarchy is the top level, what's called top secret, and there's actually 2 or 3 levels of top secret security. There's just over a million U.S. citizens that hold top secret security. To put this in context, we have about 330 million Americans. So about 1 in every 300 people in America hold a top secret clearance. And I was actually surprised that it's that many. I would not have thought it would have been more than just a few thousand. But top secret security gives the holder access to information such as military secrets, details of the nation's nuclear stockpile, what the CIA may be doing, things like that. As one might expect, the bulk of the top secret security holders work in high levels of the Defense Department or for the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, or maybe the FBI and some other agencies like that. So let me just ask you, how is this relevant to us? How is this relevant to us? We can look at God's plan of salvation this way, in terms of need to know. It's like, what we have is like having a basic security clearance. God reveals to his people today a basic understanding of the plan of salvation, what we need to know, only what we need to know to enter God's kingdom. God the Father and Jesus Christ the Son reserve to themselves details that they have not yet shared with us, but may in the future. The Apostle Paul understood this principle, and he wrote about it to the Corinthian church. Let's turn to 1 Corinthians 13:12. This time I marked things so I'd be able to get there pretty quickly. 1 Corinthians 13:12, where Paul talked about this. Paul said, beginning in verse 13:12, "For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, only in part, but then I shall know just as I am known." So what did he mean by that? Let's think about that verse for a minute. God gives us access now to the basic essential truths that we need for salvation. There are many things that we only know in part. Paul admitted that I only know many things only in part right now. I'd like to, I didn't bring it with me, but let's read this in the New Living Translation. I wrote it down. That makes this verse a little bit clearer. And New Living Translation puts it this way: "Now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror, but then we will see everything with perfect clarity. all that I know, this is Paul speaking, all that I know now is partial and incomplete, but then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely. And that brings out, I believe, more of the true meaning, the amplified meaning of this verse. God uses the principle of telling us now only what we need to know, the classified information that we need to know right now and when we need to know it, and Paul understood that. He understood that principle. And God uses this principle in dealing with his human instruments. He's always used it. Let's look at Daniel. Let me turn back to Daniel, one of the leading prophets of the Old Testament. Now, we read in the book of Daniel, go ahead, if you will, turn to Daniel 12, verse 9. That's what I wanted to get to. I marked my Bible with business cards, and the business cards slip away. That's not too good. So what do we see when we study the book of Daniel? We see prophecies. We see fantastic prophecies. We see gigantic images made up of different levels of metals. We see supernatural creatures made up of lions, bears, leopards, and parts of other animals. We see some fantastic things here, don't we? And Daniel did too, and Daniel wondered about these things, but God revealed to Daniel the meanings of some of these images and beasts. He obviously had to interpret the image of the beast, the image of many metals to King Nebuchadnezzar. But the point is, Daniel didn't understand all of it, did he? He didn't understand all of this. And so toward the end of his book, Daniel 12:9, what did God tell him? Let's turn to Daniel 12:9. Actually, I'm going to start reading in verse 8. Although I heard, Daniel said, I did not understand. And then I said, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. It's not meant for you to know right now, Daniel. I've told you all that you need to know, and the rest of it will be revealed in the end time. So Daniel's, during his lifetime, God only revealed to him what he needed to accomplish his mission at that time. Today, we think we understand a lot of what was hidden from Daniel because God said these things would be closed and sealed until the time of the end, and we have many reasons for thinking we are now living in the end times. Now, Jesus Christ himself also used this principle shortly before he ascended into heaven. Let's turn to John 20, if you will, verses 20 to 22. John 21, verses 20 to 22. And what is the setting here? This is Christ's, one of his last, maybe his last meeting with his apostles. Okay? And in this meeting, in John's account, we see Christ giving Peter his commission to feed my sheep. Let me just read verse 17. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. So Peter said to him, feed my sheep. Let me drop down to verse 20. Then Peter, turning around, saw the disciple Jesus loved following him. That disciple, of course, being the Apostle John, who had also leaned on his breast at the supper and said, Lord, who is it who's going to betray you? So Peter, seeing him, turned to Jesus and said, but Lord, what about this man? Now we all know that Peter was impetuous, he was sort of headstrong, he was often outspoken, and maybe he had a little too much curiosity. And Peter certainly shows it here. But after getting his marching orders from Christ, feed my sheep, tend my flock, Peter asked this question of Christ, and what was Christ's answer to him? And Christ said, if I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? You follow me. Peter, I've given you all that you need to know. Mind your own business. Don't be too nosy. I've told you what you need to know. If I will that John remain until I come, don't you worry about it. It's none of your business. So basically, we see that God has used this principle. Even Christ himself used this principle of need to know. Need to know. Christ had told Peter all that he needed to know at the time. What was to become of the Apostle John was irrelevant to Peter's mission. Now today, brethren, we see many disagreements among God's people. You get a group of brethren together, and sooner or later you're going to have a discussion arise over some point of doctrine. But have we considered that maybe some of our disagreements arise from the fact that we only know in part? That reasonable people, using fragments of information that God gives us on certain things, can have discussions and disagree over various aspects of our Christian walk. Have we considered that? We can disagree respectfully. What are some of these things that we only know in part? Here's just a few examples. We don't know exactly what we will be doing in Christ's kingdom, do we? In God's kingdom. We know approximately we will be kings and priests, but we don't know in detail. We don't know exactly how the New Testament church worshiped, do we? They probably didn't have the same format we have, but we don't know exactly what that was. We know very little about the world before God recreated it, do we? We know there were dinosaurs and, fantastic creatures, but we don't know a lot about that. We know most of what we know from fossil evidence, don't we? We don't know for certain whether the marriage supper of the Lamb, referred to in Revelation 19:9, we don't need to turn there, we don't know if this occurs before Christ's return or after Christ's return, do we? We just don't know. We don't know for certain what is God's perfect plan for church government today, do we? We really don't. The last point, I think, church government is one of the main points of disagreement, as we know, between some of the Church of God groups in the world today. Personally, I've long believed that it's impossible to prove from the Bible one way or the other what is the perfect format of church government. I see evidence that God used different forms of government at different times throughout the Bible to suit his purposes at the time. So, these are just a few examples. I mean, we could go on and on. There's many things we could add to that list. But the point here is that God the Father and Jesus Christ the Son let us know now what we need to know and when we need to know it. Let me repeat that. The point here is that God the Father and Jesus Christ the Son let us know now what we need to know and when we need to know it. God's plan of salvation, his magnificent plan of salvation, is tremendous and grand beyond our wildest imaginations, and we are privileged to know and understand right now what God has revealed to us, that small part that we know now. And as for the rest, all those aspects we don't fully understand, we have to do what Peter did for the rest of his life. He followed Christ as Christ directed him. He traveled hundreds, maybe thousands of miles. Remember, at that time, the fastest you could travel was on horseback, raising up churches wherever he went. He stayed faithful to the very end when he, like Christ, suffered the agony of being crucified. So, brethren, like Paul, we only see through a glass or in a glass darkly. We don't know everything, do we? But as we live our lives, we operate at a low level of security clearance. We live by God's law, we keep his commandments, and we strive to overcome in a sinful world. So in short, in conclusion, we know what we need to know at this time and nothing more. But we can take heart in knowing that it will not always be this way. We look forward to the time when, in Christ's kingdom, God will reveal everything to us. As members of the family of God, he will, we hope, raise our security clearances to top secret.